How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another video. So it seems beating the dead horse really doesn't stay beaten, and it looks like the news with Redfall just keeps on coming. We're even hearing the good old BioWare magic kind of came into play here in order to try and get this over the line. Now there are talks about 70% of Arkane stuff going out the door when this, with the development of this. That's also misinformation. But I thought I'd make this quick video just to go over some of the stuff and of course just clear any misinterpretation, but to also just get into the nitty gritty as to what actually happened with this game, where it went wrong. And it looks like Jason Schreier has, done his research again and created an article which hopefully isn't as damning as the BioWare one where he went full frontal, but at the same time it provides an insight as to where the blames were, because at present everyone seems to be blaming Microsoft, and well, Microsoft do have some part to play in this, but are they ultimately the ones to blame? Yes, they should have actually, had more oversight, but they purchased the publisher for the simple reason that the publisher can basically manage their own stuff. They're not purchasing a studio, but they would have to manage. That is the whole purpose of purchasing a publisher. You purchase the publisher, they continue as a normal business. If they purchase ABK, it's gonna pretty much be the same. It should generally be a hands-off approach because they know what they're doing and they can continue, with the exception that Bobby will probably be leaving. But so what actually went wrong? And well, if we switch over to Twitter now, and apologies for the brightness, but Jason Schreier has blocked me back from when Anthem was a game, and well, basically I disagreed with the way he went and started attacking the developers and BioWare in general. It was pretty unprofessional in my opinion, but basically my opinion meant I basically said that I didn't agree with him and he blocked me. But that aside, this is basically on a free, a non-logged in account, which is why it's got the whole white background, so I do apologize for the bright screen. But he says Redfall from Xbox's well-respected Arkane Studio is one of the year's worst reviewed games, which is true. What happened? And it basically goes on to say that Redfall started development in 2018. Arkane's Prey had been a flop. Now, I don't agree that it was a flop. I actually think Arkane's Prey was a fantastic game, but financially it was a flop. ZeniMax demanded microtransactions and management wanted to make a game with broad appeal. It was pitched as a multiplayer Arkane game, but it was never clear what that would mean, or how it would work. Arkane was always understaffed, but on Redfall, attrition also became a significant problem. By the end of Redfall's development, a whopping 70% of the Arkane Austin's developers who worked on Prey. But this is not the 70% of Arkane Austin Studios developers, it's 70% of the people who worked on Prey. So if it was 10 people that worked on Prey, 7 people left. Just keep that in contrast. I know that 70% is a really big number that people are just pasting around out there, especially with the console wars, but the reality is that 70% could literally be 7 people. It could even be less, depending on how many people actually worked on Prey, because I don't know. We're no longer there, according to people familiar as well as Bloomberg Analysis. By 2023, Redfall's microtransactions were gone, which is a good thing, because no one wants to see microtransactions in a game. But the problems remained. Arkane leadership promised that the game would coalesce with Arkane magic, and this is where I said about the BioWare magic. It does sound familiar, but it never did. Neither did BioWare. They believed up until the very end, just like their Dragon Age game, that they would use the BioWare magic that pulled it through, and it actually got Game of the Year for BioWare. Here, they believed that same Arkane magic, that pixie dust, would have worked, and well, reality struck, and it didn't. And I'm happy it didn't, because stuff like that should not be happening in any studio. And it seems even though BioWare, with their BioWare magic, failed, a lot of studios, including Arkane, simply didn't learn from that. And I guess, falling into that same boat themselves is a good thing, because now they also suffered the same problem. And I'm happy they did, because no one should be forced to work under such conditions. He says, to be clear, when I say that many devs didn't want to make Redfall, I am referring to people on the ground floor, many of whom left the company, the 70% he's referring to. Arkane leadership is another story, and so this is the actual story here. Now, there's a couple of bits in here that are actually quite important. So this bit here just talks about the actual game and the acquisition. Microsoft declined to talk about Redfall, but in kind of funny, Phil Spencer was disappointed with the numbers. But to the makers of Redfall, the mediocre reception was no big surprise. The project suffered from unclear direction, frequent attrition, and a perennial lack of staff. According to more than a dozen people who worked on the game, speaking anonymously because they were not authorized to discuss it publicly, a spokesperson for Redfall's publisher, Bethesda Studios, declined to comment. Development of Redfall began in 2018. At the time, ZeniMax, the large privately held owner of Bethesda Studios, so Microsoft still went in the picture, was looking to sell itself. Behind the scenes, the company was encouraging its studios to develop games that could generate revenue beyond its initial sales. So basically gas games, a popular trend dubbed games of soda. Okay, there you go. Which was taking off in late 2010s thanks to lucrative hits like Overwatch and Fortnite. Overwatch and Fortnite did really make it mainstream. According to the people familiar with the process, ZeniMax was strongly urging developers at its subsidiaries to implement microtransactions. Again, something that we've seen time and time again. That is, reoccurring opportunities within games for players to spend real money, they're outfitting their characters, the usual stuff. At Arkane's headquarters in Austin, Harvey Smith and Ricardo Bear, respected industry veterans, were tapped to serve as co-directors of Redfall, following the commercially unsuccessful release of its sci-fi shooter Prey a year earlier. Leadership across the company wanted to make something more broadly appealing. They wanted it to be as appealing as possible so more people could jump on and, spend money. What eventually emerged was the idea to make a multiplayer game in which users would team up to battle vampires and perhaps pay for occasional cosmetic upgrades, naturally. Since its founding in 1999, Arkane had become known for games called immersive sims, single-player experiences, which is what we know them for, like Prey, for example. Yet from the start, Redfall was pitched to staff as a multiplayer Arkane game, something that is not their specialty forte, which some team members said they found confusing, because it's just not something they're experienced in. Whether the sort of gameplay that the studio specialized in would be technically possible in a multiplayer environment was open to question. Developers under Smith and Bear said the two leads were outwardly excited, but as the project progressed, failed to provide clear direction. Staff members said that over time they grew frustrated with management's frequently shifting references to other games such as Far Cry and Borderlands that left each department varying ideas of what exactly they were making. And this was evident when they had their presentation, right? When they were talking about what the game was, because a lot of people thought it was like a Left 4 Dead clone, and they were saying, no, this is like a Borderlands game, a Far Cry game, which actually confused everyone else because no one knew what it was. No one had any idea what sort of game this was, even up until the point I actually played it. And even at the point of playing it, I still didn't know what I was playing because it just felt so disjointed. Throughout the development, the fundamental tension between single-player and multiplayer design remained unresolved. Smith and Bear did not respond to requests for comment. Arkane was perpetually understaffed, said people familiar with the production. The studio's Austin office employed less than 100 people, sufficient for a relatively small single-player game like Prey, but not enough to compare with multiplayer behemoths like Fortnite and Destiny, which are developed by teams of hundreds. Even additional support from ZeniMax's Wisconsin-based Roundhouse Studios and other outsourcing houses couldn't fill the gaps. I think this part here is the most damning part. Morale at Arkane suffered. Veteran workers who weren't interested in developing a multiplayer game left in droves. Now, if you can remember back to the Dragon Age Inquisition, the developers were actually praying that the game didn't get Game of the Year and actually would have failed, so the actual issues with the BioWare magic would come to light, and they were very disappointed when the game actually did succeed and was successful and got Game of the Year. That's pretty damning when the people working on the game want it to fail. That's clearly indicating that there are really bad things going on there. Obviously, finding people to work on those became a challenge because it takes a long time to bring those people in and actually get them caught up, get them briefed on, get them used to the tools. You know, every time you bring someone in, you need like, what, 2-3 months to get them settled in. So and then you have to make sure that they're actually a perfect fit. They might be coming in from one game that's using a completely different architecture, an engine. They have to learn that new engine that they're working with Bethesda. It's not a simple thing as just coming in, immediately settling down. It doesn't work like that. The onboarding is real, and that's a big problem. But all of this was happening before the acquisition of Microsoft from Bethesda. This was all happening, in the background. Meanwhile, on September 21st, 2020, Microsoft purchased ZeniMax for $7.5 billion. It was an ambitious move that gave Xbox control over lucrative franchises such as Doom and Fallout, as well as the upcoming Starfield, a role-playing game from the makers of Skyrim. Although adding Arkane's portfolio wasn't the main goal, it was potentially a nice bonus for Microsoft, particularly if Redfall turned into a hit. The acquisition gave some staff at Arkane hope that Microsoft might cancel Redfall because they actually wanted to cancel Redfall. They could see that it wasn't in the right place. Or better yet, let them reboot it as a single-player game. According to those sources familiar with the production, instead, Microsoft maintained a hands-off approach, which is common in these sorts of things when you are buying a publisher. Now, if you're buying a studio, that's different. You need a hands-on approach because that studio needs to be managed. But if you're buying a publisher who has the studios underneath them, they generally run the day-to-day stuff. If there are issues within the studios that need to go to the that need to go to Microsoft, they go to the publisher, who is ZeniMax, and then ZeniMax reports that over to Microsoft, and then Matt Booty would then step in. But the complaints of the staff never made it to Microsoft. Aside from cancelling a version of Redfall that had been planned for rival Sony Corp's PlayStation, Microsoft allowed ZeniMax to continue operating as it had before. Pretty much what I just said. With great autonomy, Microsoft Spencer would later say in Kinda Funny interview that Xbox didn't do a good job early in engaging with Arkane Austin. I mean, that is pretty much what it was. Microsoft do have a blame here where they did need to, step in and oversee these companies, these studios. And they didn't. They kind of left it all with ZeniMax. And ZeniMax pretty much relied on that, arcane magic to try and push it through. And it didn't happen. And in the end, when you've got unhappy staff, that pulls through for the rest of the game. And the rest of the article pretty much says the same thing. Now the question remains, of course, should Microsoft be 100% responsible for this? And I think, well, they should bear some responsibility because it's still their own company that they own. It is ZeniMax Bethesda now is Microsoft is the parent owner. But I think as the ball was rolling and as the decisions were being made and not being disclosed to Microsoft of what situation they were in, the fact that the staff were complaining and the management clearly didn't address these concerns and didn't filter them through to the relevant parties at Microsoft. Sure, Microsoft should have had more checks in place to go and talk to staff, but if you are relying on the heads of management to give you the information that you need and them not doing it, well, there's a problem there. There's a massive problem there. And yes, Microsoft should be held responsible to a certain degree, but ultimately this isn't on Microsoft. This is on ZeniMax. This is on Arkane management, and that just the blame should be there. I agree that most people are going to blame Microsoft because that's the easiest thing to do. But ultimately, this stupidness of BioWare magic, Arkane magic, this BS needs to go, and staff need to be treated a lot better, because all that Arkane magic and BioWare magic means is crunch time, overworking your staff, treating them like crap, hoping for the best that they're going to pull all-nighters towards the final week to push everything through. That's not how this works. And it's on the ZeniMax management and on the Arkane Studios management to make sure that those concerns were filtered through and alerted to Microsoft. The fact that the staff wanted to cancel it because they had no idea where this game was going or what the vision was for this game anymore. And once the developers don't know what that vision is, don't know what the game is supposed to be, they're just basically making the game for the sake of making it, you're kind of in a pretty bad position, because there's no way that game is going to turn out to be good. I don't know, you let me know in the comment section below what you think. Do you think Microsoft deserves the blame 100%, or like me, do you feel like they still have a burden of the blame because they own the studio? They should have made more checks to make sure things were in the right place, but ultimately Arkane Studios bears the most of the burden of the blame, along with ZeniMax, who did not report the concerns of their staff over to the actual parent company, Microsoft. Let me know in the comment section below. Let's have that discussion, and I'll see you in the next one. Main Legend.